Hi, in this lecture, we will be discussing about the nervous system. So, the nervous system is characterized by its structure and function. So, every conscious action that occurs in your body is governed by your nervous system. So, as you have seen from our previous lectures, there's always the nervous system as the puppeteer in the background, especially when we are talking about, say, the endocrine system. So, we have orders from the nervous system that relate to the hypothalamus, and then so on and so forth, to the pituitary gland, and then to the rest of the other glands. And then we also have orders from the autonomic nervous system, ordering the muscles in the gastrointestinal tract to move to propel the food and then the waste throughout the GI tract. So basically, those are, you have your nervous system in the background controlling almost every aspect of your body. So anyway, some of the functions of your nervous system include communication from one end of the body to another. So from the tips of your toes and for example, you can try touching your toes. So you will sense that your fingers have touched your toes. So basically, you have communication between your extremities. So collection and integration of internal and external stimuli. So if you smell a flower, if you taste your food, if you are watching TV, so those are some external stimuli. And for the internal stimuli, so for example, you have a stomach ache, or you feel out of breath. So basically, those are some internal stimuli. And even some of the internal stimuli is the urge to go to the bathroom, or your blood pressure, your heart rate is speeding up, you're being excited. So anyway, aside from that, it also formulates appropriate responses. So for example, if you get too close to the stove, of course, you might get burnt. So you will sense the heat and, of course, get away from that source of heat. So most unconscious or automatic actions are also governed by the nervous system. So those are those examples of that are the reflex actions. And then for the unconscious ones, the beating of your heart, your inhalation and exhalation, especially during your sleep, the movement of the GI tract in propelling your food. The immediacy of the nervous system response sets it apart from other control systems of the body. So it's responsible for maintaining homeostasis. So the nervous system works in concert with the endocrine system. That is why among all of the other body systems or organ systems that we have discussed so far, the endocrine system is the one that we always talk about, the endocrine system and the nervous system. Well, at least you feel the presence of the nervous system more prominently when we are discussing about the endocrine system. Although in the next section, the nervous system will also play a large role in the next system next week. So that is your musculoskeletal system. So anyway. So, the nervous system has two components. So, you have the central nervous system, which is composed of your brain and the spinal cord. So, it is encased in the axial skeleton. When we say axial skeleton, these are the skeleton when you try standing up. So, the axial skeleton are those skeletons that constitute the straight line from your head up to your hip region. Okay, so this composed of the brain. So you have the central nervous system composed of the brain and the spinal cord. So basically, from your head to the hip, so that's the brain and the spinal cord. So it's encased in the axial skeleton and covered by meninges. So we'll talk about meninges a while later. So the main function of your central nervous system is the main integrating system of the body. And then aside from that, you have the peripheral nervous system. You have this part of the this division of the nervous system is composed of, you have your afferent and efferent neurons that extend from the CNS. So these are, when we say peripheral, these are the neurons, not exactly in the exact periphery, but rather because they branch out from the central nervous system to the all other parts of your body. So we have afferent and efferent. Aside from the A and E difference, basically afferent, their difference is based on the direction of information flow. So afferent directs information from the part of the body to the central nervous system, while the efferent is basically the reverse direction. So efferent is from the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system. So both CNS and PNS information is carried by neurons and passed from one cell to another using neurotransmitters. So most of you will have heard that the nervous system is described somewhat like a circuit, because the information relay is basically in the form of an electrical impulse. So the electrical impulses are transmitted between neurons using neurotransmitters, and along the neurons using a very delicate chemical ion balance. Okay, so let's look at a neuron. So a neuron is the functional unit of the nervous system. So the functions of a neuron include carrying sensory information to the brain, formulating responses, and sending the responses to the organs. So basically, it's the wiring of your circuit. So the neurons are arranged into a bundles called the nerves. So your nerves contains bundles of neurons. So the nerves can be motor nerves, sensory nerves, or a mix of the two. Okay, so this is your the general idea of a neuron. So I think this is one of the more popular view of a neuron. So you can see the cell body and a very elongated tail, which is your axon. Now, the information reaches the CNS from the afferent division of the PNS. So, afferent, remember, the direction is from the peripheral neurons to the central neurons. So, peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system. So, the PNS picks up this information with one of the three types of receptors. So, the special senses, the sight, hearing, taste, and smell. Then, the general sensory receptors, external temperature, light, touch, or pain. And the visceral receptors, you have the proprioception and organ functions. So motor responses are formulated in the CNS and sent through the efferent division of the PNS to the muscles or organs. So basically, how it works is that the stimulus is picked up by the afferent neurons, sent to the CNS. The CNS formulates a response, and then that response is delivered to the PNS by the efferent neurons. Okay, so aside from afferent and efferent, you have a separate two divisions of the PNS. You have the somatic and autonomic divisions. Basically, this division is not based on the direction of the flow, but rather based on what movement exactly they govern. So you have the somatic division is involved in conscious movement. So it regulates voluntary movement of the skeletal muscles. And the autonomic division, which governs the body's responses to changes in homeostasis with involuntary unconscious reactions. So for the autonomic division, so it's more of the things that we need to do, or rather our body need to do to actually function properly. So it regulates functions such as blood vessel diameter and stomach activity. So such as well the peristaltic movement. So the dilation of the blood vessels. Those are some of the functions that the autonomic division controls. So as the autonomic division has two further subdivisions. You have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. For the sympathetic division, it's your fight or flight responses. So basically, these are usually activated during in times of stress. And then you have the parasympathetic division, where it's called as the rest or digest division. So this one, the parasympathetic, is responsible for the maintenance, the normal functioning of the body. So most body organs are innervated by both sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic divisions to maintain homeostasis. So later you will see they share actually the organs that they innervate, because of course, for example, we require oxygen. So that's why we even at rest we need to breathe. And then during stress, or well, basically when we are running for our lives, we need more oxygen. So of course, it's in the lungs again. So the lungs and the diaphragm. So both the lungs and the diaphragm are innervated by parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions, because they are used both, of course, when we breathe normally at rest, or even when we are running for our lives during times of great stress, like fight or flight division. So this is the general outline of your nervous system. So this is basically outline of information. So you have first an input, a sensory input. So it's either internal or external stimuli. So somatic and special sensory receptors and neurons rather relays the information to your central nervous system. Actually, everything is related to the central nervous system. You have autonomic sensory receptors, again relate to the central nervous system, and then the central nervous system analyzes what the integrates it. So basically, it analyzes what the stimulus is about, makes sense of it, and what should be the appropriate response. And actually, you are doing that in less than a second. So after that, you have, once it has formulated a response, it will relay the response to your whether it's a somatic or voluntary movement, such as will basically you want to raise your feet because for example, you want to go up the stairs, or you raise your feet. So basically it's a voluntary action, or it can be an autonomic or involuntary action. For example, you have high blood pressure, so the response of lowering blood pressure is you have your blood vessel dilation, etc., etc. So those are involuntary actions. So for the somatic control, the usual receiver are the skeletal muscles, because this is movement. And then for the autonomic control, you have the smooth muscles in the gut, you have the cardiac muscles, and the glands. So usually, the autonomic response are usually used for homeostasis, maintaining homeostasis. Now let's look at nervous tissue. So nervous tissue is made of neurons and glial cells. So we have three classes of neurons that are based on their functions. So the motor neurons, the one what they look like is actually one of the most famous one. Actually, most people, actually, when I was a child, way back elementary, I thought that all neurons look like this one, but it's not. So this is just one representation of a neuron, and this is the most famous one. You have the motor neuron. But this is not the only neuron available. So you also have the interneurons and the sensory neurons. Now, for the motor neurons, they transmit the signal from the CNS to the muscles or the glands. So basically, you have your cell body, and then you have the dendrites. So if you remember from your elementary days, the dendrites, the information is, or the impulse is received in the dendrites and then travels down to your axons and terminal. So this double line here means it's quite long. So our motor neurons and some other neurons have varying lengths, and they can be very, very long. Now we have the interneurons. The interneurons are found in the CNS, and they interpret and analyze sensory information, and they formulate a response. Now this is basically, as you can see, you have two. Unlike the motor neurons, you have one axon helix. So basically, here the dendrites, basically it's like you have two strings attached to your main cell bodies. So these are the dendrites, and these are your axons. Okay, so that's for the interneurons. And then we have the sensory neurons. So this one is somewhat like the cell bodies attached to a wire. So this is they detect changes in the internal and external environment and sends the signals to the CNS. So this is the dendrites part, and this is the axon terminal. So aside from the neuron, the nervous system is made up of neurons, but they are not the only one. So you have neuroglia. Neuroglia are the support cells. They do not necessarily conduct nerve impulses, but they are the ones that take care of your neurons, because the neurons are very, very, very delicate. And aside from being very, very delicate, they are basically one of a kind. So if you destroy a neuron, it's very, 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 very difficult to replace that. You basically lose a large chunk of yourself, or rather, you basically lose the function of that neuron altogether if you if you have damage to your neurons. Especially, for example, if you remember the famous actor that has an injury to the top of his neck. So, if you have injury in your spinal cord, which contain bundles of the axons of your neurons, when those are severe, it can actually cause you paralysis. So, that is why neurons are very delicate. So, you have a team of support cells just for them. So, the peripheral nervous system, you have the satellite cells and the Schwann cells, whereas you have for the central nervous system, there are much more. You have oligodendrocytes, the astrocytes, microglia, and ependymal cells. Now, these cells constitute what you call the blood-brain barrier. That is why when you have encephalitis or bacterial infection in the brain, it's very difficult to treat because antibiotics do not work because it cannot enter the blood-brain. It cannot pass through the blood-brain barrier. These are the blood-brain barrier. So because they protect the neurons, the nutrients, the oxygen, everything passes through them. From the blood, it must pass through them first before going to the bloodstream. And that is why most drugs cannot pass through this barrier. So, basically, each of them have their own function. So, for in the PNS, the satellite cells regulate oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, and neurotransmitter levels around ganglia. And the Schwann cells are like, when we liken the nervous system as a circuit and the neurons as basically the wires, the Schwann cells can be likened to the insulation along insulations of the wire. So that's the Schwann cells. They surround the axons and cause myelination. So they serve in faster impulse transmission. Okay, now for the CNS, you have oligodendrocytes. They surround the axons in CNS, causing myelination, so similar to the function of the Schwann cells. For the astrocytes, they maintain the blood-brain barrier. They regulate nutrient, ion, and dissolved gas concentration, absorb and recycle neurotransmitters, and form scar tissue after injuries. Microglia tends to clean up cellular debris and pathogens, so they are somewhat like the white blood cells or the macrophages in the brain. And then you have your ependymal cells. They line ventricles and central canal of the spinal cord, assist in cerebrospinal fluid production. Okay, so in the next, we'll discuss in the next section how neurons work by passing through, or how action potential works.